introduction, and then I have a short presentation for you, and then we'll take questions if there are any at the end.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. So, as you'll recall, we've had some heavy lifts recently. We got the buffer ordinance completed, and then on the heels of that, we worked on and took the affordable housing, workforce housing ordinance through. Sort of percolating under the surface during that time was the master plan zone ordinance that we've had drafted and we've talked to you previously about, but it's been quite some time. And so now that those two initiatives have kind of been accomplished, we wanted to bring this back up to the forefront. We're not looking for an introduction this morning. It's still this morning, this morning. But we did want to give you an overview and sort of the path forward so that we can sort of move forward with this next initiative. So with that,
Sure. Mr. President, we provided printouts of these slides on your desks, so I'll just move through relatively quickly, but if you have any questions, please ask. So we want to start with what a master plan zoning district is. It's a document that's supported by the comprehensive plan. It was actually included in our annual report back to the state earlier this year. It operates like a residential planned community, but with more diverse development types, and overall it creates more design flexibility for developers without having the limitations with those form-based codes which are numerically based. Although it's not intended to replace RPCs and subdivisions or the more typical types of commercial development, it is intended to promote unified, integrated, large-scale developments, so we're thinking 200 acres plus, tracts of land of more than 200 acres, where they are appropriately located, rather than instead having multiple unrelated subdivisions and commercial developments and all the separate approval processes associated with that. And I think Council have seen applications like that, where you have CUs and CZs and subdivisions all coming forward together. It's intended to incorporate the following areas as part of a single unified development plan. So it can include residential areas, it can include neighbourhood commercial areas, it can include professional, medical and financial office areas or civic areas. The civic area, for example, could be sports related or entertainment related. These are optional areas within the MPZ, so they don't have to proffer that. But there are limitations on how much residential can be included, and there has to be a non-residential component in a master plan zoning district. It is intended overall to promote interconnectivity throughout the entire development, with the existing DelDOT roadways and primary interconnected roads being dedicated to DelDOT. So what we're saying is that the internal infrastructure and those main roads within the development will be dedicated to DelDOT, with all other roads internally within the individual small cul-de-sacs being privately maintained. So.
And before Mr. Whitehouse moves to the next slide, just two thoughts, and we've talked about this before. One is this isn't a mandatory process, it's voluntary. It's another tool for land use in Sussex County in collaboration with developers and with county staff and with planning and zoning and you all, because everybody's involved in that. The other thing, as I mentioned before, we sort of didn't make this up, just on the fly. What we did actually, the City of Dover has a similar zoning classification, and that actually got implemented with the Eden Hill development, which is sort of a medical, professional, office, commercial, multifamily, and single-family residential development. Smaller because it's in Dover, in a municipality, but they sort of had the outline for how this works, and it's been implemented. So we took that, basically tore it down, and then rebuilt that ordinance so that it would apply to Sussex County.
Sure. So in terms of the process, we had envisaged a four-step process for the application, with each level of the process including confirmation that what is proposed is consistent with the previous step. So and I'll go through each step in individual detail, but basically there's a series of documents that applicants would have to submit, and those documents provide a framework, and ultimately at the end of that framework the site plans must accord with all the documents that have been approved previously. And if I go through that individually, the first step is the pre-app meeting. So the applicant would meet with staff to discuss the overall design, how much non-residential floor area is to be created in the number of dwellings. That would include discussions with DelDOT if the project's within a transportation improvement district, a TID for example, and if not, there are discussions as to whether a traffic impact study is required, and all of this happens at the pre-application stage. Also, in those discussions with staff, resource buffers are identified, and we discuss those and the relationship in terms of open space. We also discuss whether any of the units are going to participate in the Sussex County rental programme, and then at this stage, before the application come in, like an RPC, it would have to go to the State Planning Office and go through Plus in the same way that RPCs do now. The next step is the applicant would submit as part of their application a general overall master plan. They would also include a spatial distribution plan, and we'll show you an example of that in a moment. And they'd also include a master manual. And this master manual would provide the overall design guidelines for the entire RPC. They would actually prevail over any existing guidelines that exist in code. And these are quite detailed documents. You have to show area locations, density, accessory structures, building guidelines and open spaces. All of this has to be front-loaded to Planning and Zoning Commission and County Council at the beginning of the process. You don't need the individual building designs or individual site plans at this stage, but it has to be clear enough to show overall how an MPC is going to operate. And like a change of zone application, which this would be, it would be noticed in newspaper ads, site notices, postcard notifications, and then it would go through the Planning and Zoning Commission for a public hearing, and then Planning and Zoning Commission would make a recommendation to County Council, with County Council making a decision as to whether to approve or deny the change of zone. But like an RPC, it can be with amendments and or conditions of approval. So. And then, should the application be approved by County Council, there are even further documents that have to be submitted, and that's the implementation plan and the implementation manual. These two documents operate in tandem. One is a visual document, one's a text document, and they provide much, much greater detail than the previous documents. They show the natural features, topography of the site, the parking areas, the buildings, streets, roads, sidewalks, all the landscaping. Stormwater management comes forward for review at this stage, and they have to be shown. Most notably is the requirement for a development pattern book. So this includes overall details on materials, dimensions and architectural stylings of the overall development. This is so the applicant can demonstrate what the character of the development is going to look like, rather than just saying this is what the form is going to be in this location. And then these documents, if they accord with the previous documents, they go to the Planning and Zoning Commission, and the Planning and Zoning Commission can review and approve those, and then those documents go to the next step, which is the individual site plans. These are the individual site plans that have to accord with all the previous steps, and if they do accord with the previous steps, they can be, the thinking is that these be administratively approved by staff, rather than having to go through the Planning and Zoning Commission. The framework's already been established, so staff would just be checking that these comply, and if not, then take action accordingly. At this point, only minor clarifying amendments may be entered into. The aim is that we shouldn't be really amending the overall master plan at the end of the process. All this should be approved and designed up front, with only minor clarifying amendments coming forward at the late stage. And these would be valid for 5 years if approved, and then the applicant can then proceed to building permits and go through bonding. So we wanted to provide a sketch, and Council has seen this before. This is a very simple sketch of how a spatial distribution plan would operate, and this is what the applicant has to provide up front. So it outlines the overall size of the site, the open space, the adjoining uses, where the internal circulation areas are going to be, and more importantly, the applicant in this drawing has to show the distribution of density. So they have to show where the low density is and where the high density is, where the commercial and residential areas are. If there's a civic area to be proposed as part of it, or an entertainment facility, for example, or an entertainment venue, they have to show overall where that's going to be. So it assists in determining whether an MPC is going to be walkable. And this is one of the main design criteria that we wanted to bring forward, is encouraging walkability by not having all your high density necessarily on the outside, by clustering your high density and then radiating out, like contours on a topography map. So same principle.
Mr. Whitehouse, on this too, just so that for clarification, we wanted to pull this out, the spatial distribution plan, to address density. Just keep in mind that this is not the only map that would be presented. There's the general overall master plan, which is more like what you're accustomed to in terms of a site plan, not quite as much. This one is sort of like, bubble figures in terms of density, just so you can see where the density of the project is. That's in addition to a separate general overall master plan that's going to give you more of a design of the community. Yep. This is more schematic on this one.
Yep. Thank you. And then next steps moving forward, unless there's any questions that Council have, the staff's thinking on next steps is to continue working on the draft of the ordinance, continue conversations with DelDOT on road coordination within the NPC, and the overall aim that roads be dedicated to DelDOT. The next step thereafter would be to submit a draft of the ordinance to the state for PLUS review, and then if Council are in agreement, staff would then bring forward an ordinance for potential introduction, which would then lead to public hearings before the Planning and Zoning Commission and County Council. So.
And in timing-wise, just the ordinance, I would say at this point, as I said, it was percolating underneath those other initiatives. It's probably 95% done, maybe a little bit more, for discussion, if not introduction. But we have to go through those steps.
Sure.
So it's not like we have to draft it or really do a lot of heavy lifting still on the ordinance. It's in pretty good shape right now.
Mr. Robertson did talk about Eden Hill, so we included a few slides just to talk about Eden Hill briefly. It was a 2005 development. In the city of Dover, they have slightly different classifications. They don't call it an MPZ, they call it a traditional neighbourhood design residential district, a TND. It operates in the same way. This was a project that came in 2005. It does have a general overall master plan and a comprehensive design standards manual. They call it a pattern book. And the development came forward. And then this is the photo of the medical centre that opened to the public in 2008. Since then, they've come forward with 83 duplexes and townhouses. So it is a mixed-use development. But we wanted to include an example, an extract of the pattern book. That this is what came in and this is submitted. And this is, you can see the development very closely follows all those design principles. But this is a development that is very much in progress. They built the medical component of it and some of the residential component, but it's very much ongoing. But you can see on that aerial that it's a much part of a much larger planned site. So,
Sure, yeah.
so.
Any questions of council right now?
I've got a couple.
Mr. Riley?
I'm looking at the geography of the, or the geometry of the proposed, that example right there. I'm guessing that's, you just picked that. It doesn't have to be, it could be irregular in shape.
Correct.
Right. This is just an example.
Example, theoretical.
Right. And it 100% could be irregular in shape, but one of the sort of guiding principles is that the higher density should be more internal and located along the more significant roadways within the development. And that's what, as I said, we want as part of the application and the public process to cull that from the site plan so that you can actually see that schematic of the density and see where the density is going within the project a little bit easier than sometimes you can on just looking at the site plan.
I don't know if I'm clear on this. Are you encouraging potentially unrelated applications to kind of marry in together to present a zone like this?
Correct.
Like this?
Only for larger developments. So the council has seen conditional uses and change of zone applications running in parallel on smaller sites. This is intended for larger developments to unify the application process. So instead of considering multiple applications side by
It's
side.
only if the applicants want to. It's not.
That's correct.
Correct.
Right. We can impose it.
Correct.
And suppose an existing development, perhaps of some size, wanted to expand, could they incorporate their existing development with additional development to create this type of district?
I think they probably could. So they would have we hadn't really thought about it, but they would have their existing, say it's a subdivision or an RPC. The application for an MPZ would include that within it, and it would have to show, unless they're going to completely change what was approved, it would have to show what has been approved for that portion of it, and then the rest of it would be considered anew. So, yeah, no, I don't see any reason. I mean, they'd have to follow the same steps, but there wouldn't be any reason why they couldn't. Yeah.
Just curious.
And of course, if they did that, then whatever may be in that existing development, whether it's some of those other areas, the civic area or whatever, there's percentages allocated to that, so that would count against the overall MPZ.
Yeah, we'd have to balance according to the guidelines.
Right.
And this can be used throughout,
Schaefer.
This can be utilized throughout the county. It's not going to be,
It'd be a new zoning district, so obviously the location, the appropriateness of a location would be a decision for council as part of the public hearing. So, but it depends on where you would propose it, but it potentially is available countywide.
and I think one of the questions was, and I may be incorrect, I may have misunderstood, are you going to encourage competing developers that are contiguous to work together with a master plan? Is that your question? I think?
Essentially.
If you had two developers and say each one had 100 acres, you mean they could work together to bring forward an MPZ and have the advantages of unifying and having multiple developers? Absolutely, they could do that. It's based on the tract size being 200 acres, so yes, they could do that. So.
Any more questions? Thank you.
Okay, well, we've got our marching orders, so we'll proceed and look for this to come back to you, depending on, how soon we get feedback from those state agencies. Because we're sort of saying to DelDOT, this is what we'd like to happen with those streets, so we need to have feedback from DelDOT where they'll say, yes, this works. So those kinds of things are going to be the next steps, and we'll get back to you with hopefully an ordinance to introduce.
No, it's something that's been discussed for a while,
Right.
and now we're maybe a chance to move it forward. If the
That's right.
council chooses to do that, then it's a good thing. But thank you for all your work.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Very